Good morning. So the story I have today is a legend. A legend is a traditional story. Sometimes people say that it's historical, but it's really never actually been proven to be true. So that's what we have today. So let's begin. So there once was a man who was adored by the people in his town, by most of them. His town was in the beautiful Catskill Mountains of New York. Children would see him come by and they would be so excited and joyful. The local women would smile when he went by because he was always willing to stop and help them do their errands or do some odd jobs for them. Except at home. His farm was a mess, and his house was in disrepair. It was falling apart. He would actually rather sit on a wet rock and fish all day, even if he never caught a single fish. Sometimes he would take his gun and he would just trudge through the forests and the swamps and spend his days hunting for squirrels and wild pigeons. This man was Rip Van Winkle. He was just one of those people. He just had a happy way about him, not troubled by much, and would have been perfectly happy just whistling his day away. However, his partner, Dame Van Winkle, was very unhappy with him and what she called his lazy ways. So as the years went by, Rip and his trusty dog, Wolf, would stay out of her way as much as they could to avoid her frustrated words. One place he could often be found was sitting on the benches in the shade of a large tree that was right in front of a small inn. There he and many others would sit through these long, lazy days, and they would just talk listlessly about village gossip or tell endless sleepy tales about nothing. Well, one day, as happened often, Dame Van Winkle came to find him and take him home to help her with the housework. Well, it didn't take him too long, as soon as she had stepped away, to grab his gun and call his dog and head into the forest and up the mountain for the seat at the foot of a tree overlooking the beautiful valley. He and Wolf just sat and pondered and watched the day move on. The colors of fall and the setting sun. Well, soon he realized the shadows were getting long and it would be dark before he was able to get home. So, with a heavy sigh, he heaved himself up and he began to head down the mountain. Then he stopped. Just as he was starting down, he heard a voice from far away. "Rip Van Winkle!" He couldn't see anything except some crows in the sky. He thought maybe he had just imagined it. And then again, "Rip Van Winkle!" This time Wolf growled, and Rip saw a small man coming up the mountain, and he was carrying a cask. That's like a little barrel. And it was on his back. Well, he didn't know this man, and the man was dressed very oddly, like in some old-fashioned clothes. But without a word between them, he took the cask from the man and followed him. As he followed the small man silently through the mountains, they came to an opening in the trees, and there were a number of men in kind of quaint clothing and odd hats, beards of all sorts. They were playing games, some bowls, and they were not speaking a word or even smiling. It seemed very strange to Rip. Well, soon the cask was opened and it was poured into mugs for everyone. Rip gave it a try and he found it was pretty delicious, and he drank some more. Eventually, the darkness of the night and the exertions of this day moved him to fall into a deep sleep. Rip woke up. He found himself back at the foot of that tree where he had first heard and seen the small man. He thought, "Surely I have not slept here all night." He recalled those odd men and their strange things that had happened the night before. He reached for his gun and he just found a rusty old rotten thing that looked like it was somebody's gun at one time or another. Well, he called for Wolf repeatedly, and Wolf was not coming. So he was a little confused, and so he turned to head home. Along the road on the way home, he encountered strangers in strange clothing. He thought he knew everyone in those parts, but I guess not. And then there were a whole lot of new buildings. And these strangers were all staring at him and stroking their chins. He reached up and stroked his chin, and oh my gosh, he had a beard. It was more than 12 inches long. Well, so he decided he wanted to get to the inn to find his friends. So he hurried to that small inn to find his companions under the shade tree beneath the sign of King George. The inn was gone. It had been replaced by another kind of ramshackle building. The tree was gone, and in its place was a big pole with a flag that had stars and stripes fluttering off the end of the pole. He did recognize the sign, however, but King George had traded in his red coat for a blue one, and his scepter for a sword. He sported a odd little triangular hat, and the words under it said General Washington. There was still a crowd of people there, but they seemed anxious and busy and argumentative. They spoke about the rights of citizens, elections, Congress, heroes of '76, Bunker's Hill, and all this other babble that just made no sense at all to him. When they asked him how he voted and was he a Federal or a Democrat, he was so confused and overwhelmed. He told them, "I am a poor, quiet man and a loyal subject of King George." This caused a cry from the crowd that made him fear for his safety. He began to ask after his friends, and he was told of their deaths and their adventures in the war. He just couldn't understand. What war? Then he asked if they knew Rip Van Winkle. "Oh, yes," they said. "He wandered off some 20 years ago. His dog came home without him." "I am Rip Van Winkle. Does no one recognize me?" The crowd parted and an old woman came walking through, and she looked closely at him. "Well, sure enough, Rip. Welcome home. Where you been?" Now, Rip has told that story many times now on a bench outside the new inn. And he has spent many hours there trying to wrap his head around what had happened while he slept. How was it that he slept through a revolution? This is an old and famous story, but would you be surprised to know that it was a favorite of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King? It's one he told a lot. As a matter of fact, just almost 55 years ago, in 1966, he told it to a very large crowd of Unitarian Universalists. He talked about the civil rights movement and urged all of those who were there listening to him to wake up, to not sleep through the big changes that were happening all around as Black people and their supporters worked to gain equal rights. He asked white people in particular not to be asleep, not to ignore injustice. He urged people to wake up. Well, in the last few years, a new set of leaders from the people of color community are sending the same message Dr. King sent 55 years ago to that group of Unitarian Universalists. Wake up! Many of the injustices, much of the unfairness is still with us. I want to suggest that you talk to your family and see if they can tell you about times when they have woken up to injustice. And when they saw those things by the light of day, what did they choose to do? There are still people waking up today. So that's one of the things that we need to do. We need to remind people. They need to wake up and pay attention to the world. Don't sleep through the revolution like old Rip Van Winkle. Y'all have a blessed week. See you soon.